one fun or weird statistic or scientific fact that you think we should share with our listeners today, Holly?
I guess one fact that's interesting about DNA is that we share half of our DNA with a banana, and people don't realise that. So, when you say us and a banana are so completely different, but actually the DNA and what's inside us and what's inside a banana actually is about 50% the same. So we're not that different after all.
So say that again. Our DNA is about 50% the same as a banana.
Yeah, exactly. So our DNA and a banana's DNA are about 50% the same. So we're not that different after all, basically, to a banana.
And what's the 50% that's the same?
Well, you've got to think about it. It's all the things that, make up proteins, there might be DNA code to make cells, to make cell membranes, all of that sort of thing. People would think, actually, the DNA between a human and a banana must be completely different, but actually the things that make up the basic cellular structures are actually fairly similar.
Well, that is one fact. I think if we'd ever, I'm putting that in the next quiz. What's the percentage of DNA that we're the same in a banana? I can't imagine anyone's going to get that right unless we're scientists in the audience. Probably the most weirdest fact I think I've ever heard in my life. Hi everyone, happy 2026, happy new year. I hope you've had a wonderful festive season. We are kicking off 2026 with a belter of a podcast. Back in October 2025, I was invited to sponsor the TEDx Teesside event. And as part of my sponsorship, I said that I would choose a winner for my podcast, somebody who I felt was not just breaking down barriers, but really being that voice on the edge of change. And this one is absolutely that. This is a story of resilience, representation, and redefining what I believe science looks like. This lady is a rising voice on the edge of change who is reshaping who gets seen, heard, and believed in science. Holly Ellis just isn't part of that conversation. She's the catalyst for it, she's leading it, and she is proving that the next era of science needs voices, new stories, and quite frankly, new leaders. So if there was ever a voice standing right on the edge of change, then this is it. And having heard her speaking on the TEDx stage, she absolutely blew me away. If there was ever a voice standing on the edge of change, then this is it. And having met Holly Ellis in person myself, I am absolutely delighted to welcome her to the first podcast that we're kicking off in 2026 for Voices on the Edge of Change. It's so great to have you here, Holly. I've been immensely excited about having you on the podcast. You blew me away. In fact,
Thank
you just
you.
blew me away. You blew all my friends away in the audience. You were sort of that big surprise. We had absolutely no idea. I actually deliberately didn't read the program because I thought if I read the program, then I might make some assumptions and I didn't want to do that. So before we get into who you really are, and I love this Scouse Scientist name, why don't you tell us a little bit about your backstory, how you grew up, and what made you get into science?
So I grew up in Liverpool it was just me and my mum, and my auntie lived next door and Nan lived across the road. So I used to always say that I had three mums growing up because my auntie never had any children. And I grew up just in a quite normal, but what I think is a normal background. Went to primary school and then went to a state school for just a local comprehensive for secondary school. And I guess I was always just quite bright in school. Like naturally, I found school quite easy. I was getting good grades. I did work hard as well. And my mum always sort of really encouraged me and pushed me to work hard and do the best that I could. And then I guess it was towards the end of secondary school, I was getting these really good grades in science, and some of my teachers tried to say to me, why don't you go into science and take that further at university or whatever? But I just didn't know whether it was for me. I didn't know whether people like me could be a scientist, basically. But cut a long story short, I then changed schools and went to a different school for sixth form. I was taken on a school trip down to Oxford and encouraged to apply. And I ended up applying for biological sciences and getting a place. So I studied that for 3 years and then joined the NHS afterwards, where I've worked sort of for the past 10 years as a clinical scientist in genetics. So that's a very quick version of events, and I'm happy to go expand a bit more on any of that. But yeah, that's the basics.
Yeah, I think why I mean, I have a few founding businesses at the moment, and one is Work Ready Collective, where we're trying to encourage people to think that they can be anything, if they've got the confidence. And I'm just really interested in a statement that you just said, people like me. And it fascinates me, because I think we all suffer from, in some form, imposter syndrome, don't we? Regardless of our backgrounds. And as we've got two very different backgrounds, clearly you can hear just from our accents. But when you say people like me, just to unpack that a little bit for our listeners speaking, I mean, I don't mean to be typecast with this question, so forgive me, and my listeners forgive me when I'm doing this particularly to talk about this for the podcast, but people like me, did you feel because you weren't in a private education, did you feel because maybe it's not as easy in Liverpool? And did you also feel maybe because you were a girl at the time, I know you're a woman now, but at the time you were a young girl, that it was almost like the impossible task to think that you could even go into science?
Yeah, exactly. All of those things. And there were just multiple factors at play here. So, first of all, the way I looked, just being a young girl with blonde hair who was into makeup and fashion and all of that. I'd never seen a scientist who looked like that before. I guess the way I sounded, my accent, the fact no one in my family had been to uni before, let alone, Oxford or Cambridge. The fact I wasn't from a private school, I was from the local comprehensive. I just had all of these things against me, and also just being a woman, having the Scouse accent, in that's its own thing in itself. That if it was just that on its own, that would be a big enough sort of thing to put you off. But yeah, so there was all of these things, and the main thing was I didn't know anyone who was a scientist who I could relate to. There was no scientists that I could relate to, and it just wasn't something. I didn't even think it was a real career. It was something I'd heard of, in sci-fi films or this or that. I didn't actually know, oh, actually being a scientist is an actual job. And I didn't think that it was a job that someone like me could have. So yeah, I guess there was a lot of things that were affecting that, really.
And what era was that? Is that the 2000s? Forgive me, I don't want you to
Yeah.
give away your age completely, but
Oh no,
I'm
it's
just
fine. I'm 32. I'm 32. So I guess when that was about yeah, so if I was probably when I was sort of like 15, 16. So maybe like sort of the 2000s up to 2010 sort of thing.
wow, that's yeah, I mean, that's really quite something. And I think that, dare I say it, with the people that I was sitting with as well at TED, we were probably quite surprised as well when you got into what you do and we'll get into that in the podcast, which is why
Yeah,
you're here. But I think there were a lot of people in the audience actually that were probably quite like shocked and surprised of what I think, and anybody else thinking of the mad scientist would be the Back to the Future guy,
yeah,
the mad hair. And in fact, I worked with an engineer at the BBC called Steve, who had been at the BBC all of his life, I think over 45 years actually. And he literally had that mad grey hair. So
yeah,
anytime there was a technical issue with anything on air, you just ring Steve,
yeah,
right? And so when you put up that picture, I just turned to Claire, my partner, and I went, that's my friend Steve.
yeah,
So I think we can all, when we're listening to you, and if we're not watching it on YouTube and we haven't got the picture that comes up now, I'll see if I can edit that in. That mad professor, well, that is what you would be thinking a scientist in your day, and certainly in my day, would have looked like, right? Or a boffin,
Yeah,
generally a bald head, big
exactly.
glasses.
Yeah, that's it. And I think that's the problem, to be honest, because we all have this idea, and I certainly had that idea as well of what a scientist looks like, what a scientist is. These old men with crazy hair, white lab coat, glasses. And I just think, a lot of the time that is still now how scientists are portrayed, on TV, in the media, and in films. That is, if they wanted someone to play a scientist, that is the stereotype that they would automatically jump to. But it's actually quite problematic, because that means that young girls who don't
Yeah.
look like that think, well, that's what a scientist looks like, so that's not me. And that's essentially what I'm trying to do as the Scouse Scientist, trying to say, actually, it doesn't matter what you look like, what you sound like. If you're interested in science, then go for it, basically.
And I think that's marvelous. And that was actually, to be honest, I mean, the surprise you all gave us on stage was huge. And then that was trust me, the competition was fierce, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but, that was when I was looking for the criteria of who I really felt was going to make a difference for this particular podcast. And the winner was particularly that, the fact that this is Voices on the Edge of Change, this podcast that I do all myself with a bit of help from a lovely guy, a surfer dude in Portugal, Ben. I'll give him a bit of a shout out because he
Yeah.
saves me every time at the edit. But again, he's breaking a stereotype, right? He's a surfer and he does editing in as a side hustle. So I think it's really important that we break down these barriers, particularly today, and particularly actually even more so right now with the big problem that we've got with EDI right now, and the fact that we are almost, dare I say it, going backwards in terms of where women stand in the workplace. So not only are you working in medicine, not only are you working in science, you're breaking down massive myths. So was there one person, was it just your teacher, or was it your mum, or was it just a collective amount of people that sort of said, come on, Holly, you can do this?
Yeah, so I was really, really lucky that I was surrounded by people who believed in me, I guess, and gave me that confidence. So it was, first of all, it was my teachers, because at that age, 14, 15, 16, I was really into the art. So I played the piano, I taught the piano, I was into ballet and took that quite seriously. I loved music and drama, all of that, and I thought that was the route that I was going to take. So I didn't, like I say, really consider science until my teachers took me to one side and said, look, you are really good at science. I remember this particular moment. I got 100% in my biology GCSE exam.
Wow.
And the teacher said to
Oh,
me, yeah, he's like, this is unheard of. Like, you really need to seriously consider this. And I sort of spoke to my mum about it, and she didn't know anything about science, but she thought it was, a good idea to do this further. And the teachers and my mum sort of said to me, do science as your career. You can still do dancing, the art, everything like that as a hobby. Just keep that as a hobby, but the science,
yeah.
you've got a real talent for it, I guess. But yeah, and then when it came to applying to Oxford, that was a whole other thing. So that was different teachers who took me on a school trip to Oxford. They took the top, whatever, 10% of students on a trip. And then afterwards, they encouraged us to apply. But again, I was just like, it's not for me. I had a great time on the trip with my friends, but it's not for people like me. And in the end, my mum sort of said, just apply. Look, you're probably not going to get in anyway. So just apply, and then that's your decision made. So I did. And then when I had an interview and all of that, and then when I got in, I was absolutely panicked, because I just was so anxious, because I didn't think I'd fit.
Yeah.
I just didn't think, again, that Oxford was for people like me. And that was really tough, like trying to force myself to go there in the first place, because I was just absolutely terrified, to be honest.
Let's go back to imposter syndrome, because that's very real. And we know that actually imposter syndrome accounts for quite a lot of burnout in
Mm.
people's lives right now. What was the first, I mean, this wasn't a question I was going to ask you, but what was it like moving to Oxford from Liverpool? How did it feel?
Well, the first night, so I travelled to Oxford with my mum and my nan, and we stayed overnight the night before. So we got the train down with all these like suitcases and things. Then we stayed in this youth hostel in Oxford the night before because we couldn't afford to stay in one of the other, fancy hotels. And when we got to the next day, I had to go to the college, and all the students were saying, "Oh, I stayed in the Randolph and I stayed in here and here." And I was just sort of keeping quiet because I didn't want anyone to ask me where I'd stayed because I felt embarrassed. And that whole night, I was crying my eyes out. I was saying, "Please don't leave me here." I was like, "I can't stay." And my nan is like, she was like, "Right, forget it. Come on, of course you can. Let's just go home. Let's just go home." And my mum was the one who said, "Please, please stay," because she obviously knew it was an amazing opportunity. So she just said to me, "Please stay for 1 week. I'll come back next week. And if you don't like it, you can come home." And I said, "Okay, I'll stay for a week." So she did. She come back the following week. And I loved it. I'd had the best time. It was nothing like I thought it was going to be.
Right. Oh, wow.
Nobody cared where I came from. No one cared what my accent was. I had a really positive experience. I made so many amazing friends from all walks of life, people from really privileged backgrounds who'd gone to Eton and schools like that, and then other people from sort of more working class backgrounds like me. But it was a really amazing, mixture of people, and no one in my experience cared really where anyone was from. We'd all worked hard and everyone was just so grateful to be at Oxford.
So you're there, and I think what I'm hearing, is that you effectively got in because of your own merits. Kudos to you, really. And actually, it was irrelevant, and that's how life should be. If only we could grasp that everywhere, how great would life be? So you've obviously chosen a very challenging field. You've gone to Oxford, and thank goodness, you've had an incredibly positive experience. And, it's a dream for most people to get into university, let alone go to Oxford. So that's just unbelievable. You clearly knew this wasn't going to be an easy path. What made you pursue, regardless of the difficulty that you thought you might entail along the way? You're obviously a very resilient woman.
Yeah. Well, like I say, I did have a lot of encouragement from people. And I guess that time at Oxford really, it sort of changed me in a way, and it made me think, well, no, I do deserve a place here. I've worked hard. I don't care. I'm not going to try and change to fit in. There were other people that I knew, a couple of others from my school who had also got in to Oxford. And I could see them changing and, putting on a different accent or trying to
Right.
fit in with
Conform.
other people. And I just thought, no, I don't want to do that. I want to just be me. Like, I got in to this
Mm.
position, speaking like this, looking like this. And it made me so determined to just be myself and not change and not. So I guess that really did give me the confidence to just say, well, look, I've got in speaking the way I speak, doing everything, dressing the way I want, looking the way I want. So that's what I'm going to stick to. I'm not going to change.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think
Okay.
it's such an important thing to just hang on for a minute. That I think in the world that we live in now with social media, I've got a daughter. I've actually got many stepdaughters, but I've got a young daughter, particularly at the moment, and I've got young grandchildren. And this sense of needing to conform, to look the same as everybody else. I mean, I think you and I all agree there isn't, regardless of our age group and our algorithms, there isn't a single thing you look at every day that doesn't tell you what cream you should be using or what Botox you should be
Yeah.
having and where, how sculpting your face or
Mhm.
and actually, I even had to buy my 13-year-old niece these creams the other day, and I was thinking, what am I doing? Who puts face cream on like that at
Yeah.
13? But I think this pressure to
Mm.
conform and the fact that you were so clear on your principles and your
Mm.
own values are getting quite emotional actually, because I really think that's something I'm very strict about my values actually.
Yeah.
And I think that's to be commended, Holly.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm getting quite emotional because I
Oh,
don't think many women
yeah.
hold their values as true to their heart and to be so strong. So I've really hats off to you.
And I appreciate that because, yeah, I think it would have been easier in a way for me to start changing my accent, changing the way I dress, changing what, the way I was and everything like that. But it wasn't me. And for me, one of my true, like, core values is about being yourself and not trying to fit in. And actually, that served me well at Oxford, and it served me well since, because it made me memorable. I'd speak to everyone, and it's a great conversation starter because there was hardly anyone who spoke like me in Oxford, and it was a brilliant conversation starter. Most people have, it's where are you from, and then it's talking about the football or talking about this, and it made me stand out in a way. And people, the tutors, the students, people, the porters, the cleaners, everyone like that, everyone knew who I was. And I sort of turned it into a positive, I guess.
Well, that's great, and I think that's a really great message to anyone listening to this podcast: is don't see it as a negative. What is it about yourself that you can turn? I mean, turn into turn into a podcast. That's not what I meant to turn into a positive, because I think I'm very dyslexic. People know that if they've listened to me many times on this
Mm,
podcast, and I've actually used it as a positive thing rather than a negative thing. And I hope that's given hope to, well, I know it's given hope because people have told me, to many other people. But this isn't about me, it's about you. So tell us, you're now working on scientific research, and particularly in the genetics area, which is, for people that don't know, I'm just going to do a call out to a charity called Max's Foundation at this point. I hope you don't mind, Holly, but my girlfriend lost her son to an undetected heart condition at the age of 10. And we set up a charity called Max's Foundation. And our slogan is Heart Set on Change. And the one thing about the charity, and I'm really delighted to say that although it's horrendous circumstances, we're now 10 years on, and we're almost up to our first £1 million worth of fundraising. So
wow,
it's really from
amazing.
a kitchen table, literally.
Yeah.
But the reason why I say this is the charity funds research only at Great Ormond Street Hospital into finding a detection for undetected heart conditions in under 14-year-olds. That is all
Mm,
we're about. We don't try and be anything else. And so the reason why I say that for this podcast isn't just to give a big up to the charity, because my friends do incredible work, but it's because one of the things you said on stage was the positivity of research and going deep into genetic DNA. And what I took away from your conversation, and I think most of us did, but maybe because I'm in this field with my girlfriend trying to sort out
mm,
Max's foundation, but what I took away was the positivity of proactiveness on health. And that, I think, is a game changer. The fact that you could actually understand your genetics and know, dare I say this, God forbid, but actually I would be better off having a mastectomy at the age of 40 because I could live another 40 years than actually having the surprise at 55 that I might not get to 60, I think is something really amazing. So could you, for the listener, give a bit of background into the work that you do, because
yeah.
I think it's fascinating.
Yes. So my role, as I said, I've been in the NHS for 10 years now, which is crazy because that's just gone so fast.
Well, you're
But
only 32.
yeah, so I joined sort of more or less straight after uni. I had my first role in the NHS, and then it's took time to, I guess, work my way up. But yeah, so my role is, I've always worked in genetics, so that's to do with our DNA. And my role now is a principal clinical scientist. So we are focused really on diagnostic work. So diagnosing patients and their families with genetic conditions. So what people probably don't understand is the impact that a diagnosis can have on people, because it's not just about, oh, there's a name for that condition, although that is in some cases super important for people because they don't know what's wrong with them, and just having this is the name of the condition is a great sort of relief for some patients. So just knowing what their diagnosis is can also give information to other family members to see what their risks are of particular conditions. So it can be either rare diseases or cancer. Basically, they're the two main things that we split it into. But yeah, I guess with genetics, I think I said in my talk years ago, genetics was quite a niche area of the healthcare
Mm.
system. We were genetics in a genetics lab doing a few tests for a few genetic conditions that we knew about. But the advances over the last sort of 20 years have been incredible. And now genetics is playing a part in so many different aspects of the NHS. And this is where it's just changed so much and it's having an impact in so many different areas. So, for example, like what you were saying, there's a pilot now in the NHS called the Generation Study, where they're screening newborn babies for 200 genetic conditions for which early intervention is beneficial and treatment is available. So for those children, at the minute, babies, well, listeners might have heard of the heel prick test that you get when the baby's born, and that only tests them for 9 conditions. Now we're looking at using genetics to expand that for 200 conditions. And a lot
That's
of
unbelievable.
yeah, and a lot of them, it's the earlier you find out, the sooner you can have treatment, and the sooner you're treated, the better your outcomes are. So having that information in advance is really, so beneficial. It's also, I guess, in pharmacy, I was talking a bit in my talk about how genetics can be used now to predict how someone is going to respond to a particular drug. Are they going to what type of dosage of this drug is going to be better for that individual person. And it's moving towards this personalised medicine, like you were saying before. So it's all about looking at people's genes and seeing, which treatment options are best for them, rather than just saying, everyone who's got cancer can have this chemotherapy. It's moving away from that and saying, using the DNA, the information from DNA, to provide sort of more bespoke treatments for that individual person's cancer. So there's absolutely loads of things, prenatal testing for baby pregnant women who want to know if the baby is at risk of any genetic conditions. So it's absolutely, it's just affecting the NHS in so many ways and changing it for the better.
And yeah, I mean, look, I don't normally declare my faith on a podcast, particularly at the moment. But anyway, being Jewish, which I am, Tazak plays a really big part, and that was
Yeah.
something we had to consider with my first husband when I got married, because
Mm,
we did get tested for that, because it's
mm,
really profound in the
yeah.
Jewish faith. Because a bit like the royal family, really, we all sort of intermarry. And then the other one, it's just gone out my head. But there was another one. Oh yes, the other one is the BRCA gene. And actually, I believe the NHS are doing well. I know that they are, because I've just been asked to enter into the program, but for
Yeah.
free.
Yeah.
Been invited, particularly over 55 at the moment. You've been invited into a BRCA gene testing. Well, that's unbelievable for us to be able to offer that to people in this country.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it's about. So it's identifying those who are most at risk. So like you say, it's the Ashkenazi Jewish
Yes,
population that are particularly,
which
at
I
risk
am.
of these things. Yeah, exactly. So that's why, you will be invited to be screened to look at your BRCA gene. So the BRCA genes, just for those listening, it's BRCA. It stands for breast cancer. So if you've got, if one of those genes, the BRCA1 or BRCA2 genes, are faulty, then it means you're at an increased risk of getting breast cancer and ovarian cancer and some other cancers. But something that's actually really interesting on that is, I had a friend, and her had a faulty BRCA gene, which he knew because his mum passed away with breast cancer, and then she was tested, and then subsequently he was tested. And they actually went through a process called PGD, so pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. So they had a baby, and basically they could go through this process, this special type of IVF with genetic testing, to make sure that he didn't pass on that faulty gene to his daughter.
Wow.
Basically, so they've got a little girl now who's same age as my daughter, and I've shared this story before, so they're happy for me to talk about it. But yeah, without that testing, she would have been at a 50% chance of having that faulty gene. And if she had that faulty gene, there would be an 80% chance that she would get breast cancer. So now she's born and they know she hasn't got that gene, because they went through this testing to make sure that that was not passed on. And you can do that for a lot of genetic conditions now, which is just incredible, really. So it's about prevention rather than cure. So that's what we're trying to focus on now, I guess.
And, longer term, if we were to make those investments, which we are clearly, and obviously we're making small inroads for such big things that are out there right now, but,
Mm.
you know, how much money would we ultimately save the NHS if we
That's
could
the
be more
thing. Yeah.
proactive, right?
Exactly, because people say, "Oh, it's so expensive to
I
do that,"
know.
but actually, further down the line, if that child would have gone on to have breast cancer, all the treatments, the chemotherapy, the after treatment, operations, mastectomies, everything like that, actually, a lot of the time, it works out to be a cost saving, and it's the same with the pharmacogenomic stuff that I was talking about. So the stuff where we're looking at genetics to predict those who would have an adverse drug reaction. So although we're testing everyone up front, which seems like a huge cost, the actual cost saving is huge because people who have adverse drug reactions end up costing the NHS, I think it's something like £2 billion a year is spent on adverse drug reactions. So actually doing the test up front and preventing that actually works out a lot better.
Well, also the other thing, I've been doing quite a lot of work in female health over my time, in my roles, and there's a statistic, and again, there's a company called Fertility that are doing quite a lot of work in this area. You may have heard of them, but where they got up and said that all of the medicines that most women take for female health are not tested on women.
Yeah. And there's huge
They've been tested on men.
health inequalities, absolutely huge. Even thinking about things like the contraceptive pill for
Yeah,
women and things like that, all of those, most of the contraceptive options for women have huge, awful side effects.
I
And
know.
like that has never been changed for absolutely, I think it's something like for 50 years, it's never been updated. The medicine for Viagra for men is constantly getting updated and improved and less side effects and this and that. And it's,
Can't
it's
imagine why, Holly.
easy, isn't it? Yeah. Exactly. It's quite a funny one, that funny comparison, but it just goes to show actually the health inequalities and the disparity against men's and women's health.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Well, there's a lot we could go into
Yeah.
there, but we'll leave that
Just
one
leaving
there,
that.
shall we? And let our audience think about that one themselves.
Mm.
But yeah, so wow, there's so much I could go into here, but I think in the spirit of time, out of everything that you've told me so far, what one element are you the most passionate about now? Where do you see your passion?
Yeah, so I think in terms of I guess there's two things really. So there's in terms of my NHS role, the thing that I guess drives me the most is the benefit to the patient. So we don't see patients face to face. If you went into the hospital, I wouldn't deal with you directly, but it's the work that we're doing has and ultimately impacts the patient, and that's what drives me in that role. And then I guess the other thing that I've not really touched on yet is my Scouse Scientist persona. So obviously I created the Scouse Scientist YouTube channel and social media platforms to try and provide a role model in science that young people can relate to. And I guess that is a huge passion of mine that I really want to take forward. So I've done a lot of work with schools, a lot of outreach work, a lot of film and videos in the lab to try and show young people what we do and to show them that actually this is a career for you. And I think a lot of the time, young people, when they see me, it challenges that perception of what a scientist looks like. And it makes them think, well, if she can do it, then I can do it too. And that's something that I'm really passionate about and want to take, as far as I can, really.
Well, you beat me to my next question because that I want to get into more.
Sorry.
But no, 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 it's great. And also, there's something called the Women of the Year Award. So you need to enter for the Scouse Scientist into
Oh,
that next
okay.
year. Give you more details offline. But yeah, the Scouse Scientist persona, you sort of talked a little bit about how that began. And I think what's really lovely that I'm hearing in what you're saying, particularly at the age that I'm at and where I am in my career, which is about, and I think women are particularly good at this. I don't mean to diss men in this, but I do think women give more back. And what I see at my age now with the people that I work with and the people that are coming on the podcast is that everybody wants to have some form of legacy at the end. And I
Mm.
think what's lovely about your Scouse Scientist persona is the fact that you're not waiting till you're my age, actually. You're saying, okay, do I look like a scientist? If we had to get a lineup, one of those FBI
Yeah.
lineups, and you said, who's a scientist? Nobody would be picking you, right? Let's face it. So I love the fact that actually you're already thinking about education, you're thinking about employment, you're thinking about encouragement into areas of businesses. And I think that as we get into the world of AI and unpacking the hidden jobs, the fact that you've even started to think proactively about this is really, really fantastic. So let's unpack a little bit about the scale scientists and the misconceptions and what, somebody listening to this who's thinking, oh, I'm a Holly. How can I be Holly number two? Or how can I be the scale scientist number two? What things would you like to mention to them?
Yeah, so obviously I started it about 5 years ago now. I just had this idea of, I felt like it was something that I needed back then. When I was 14, 15, and my teachers were telling me to do science and to go to Oxford and all of this. And I was like, no, it's not for people like me, like I said earlier. If I'd have had someone like that I could just look up to and, look up online and tell, actually, they're doing it and they're like me, that would have encouraged me. And I think the statistics show that so many young people from working class backgrounds are getting the grades. They're getting good grades,
Mm,
good
mm,
enough science, good enough to go to Oxford, but they don't apply because, one, they don't know how to, and two, they don't think it's for them. So that's really what I'm trying to do, just trying to put videos out there, trying to just change this view of what a scientist is. And I always say, if you can see it, you can be it. And that's really the point of it. It's for young people to say, well, if Holly can do it, then I can do it too. And it's just encouraging them to be themselves. And you don't have to look like me to follow me, but it's about showing that just be yourself, and actually you can achieve anything you put your mind to. It's not even about necessarily always about science. And I try and show other bits of my life and bring other bits into it as well. Because I started at the beginning, I was just filmed, a little video on my phone in this room. Actually, I didn't know what I was doing. I was up putting it on YouTube, and I've gradually got a little bit better. And then I guess I had a baby, so I've got a daughter who's 2.5 now, and I had all these ideas of what I was going to do on mat leave with the Scouse Scientist, and I did none of it because having a baby was absolutely like turned my life upside down. I did nothing but survive that first year. And then I was back at work and I was just struggling really to find the time. And then this year, I made it my New Year's resolution. I'm going to pick the Scouse Scientist back up again because I'd sort of started it and done a few years, then put it back down. And then I was feeling like me again, I guess, after having a baby. And I guess this year, I just felt like getting a bit more back to normal after having a baby. And I thought, right, I'm really going to put my all into it this year and
mm.
to full year as much as I can and see where it gets me. And to be honest, it's led to loads of amazing opportunities. I did the TEDx talk, I've been on
Yes.
involved in British Science Festival, I've been doing a lot of work with BBC Radio Merseyside, and loads of schools have been in touch asking me to go and visit and do talks and this, and it's led to so many incredible opportunities, and I'm just really grateful for that. So I think I'm just going to keep saying yes to whatever comes up and just seeing where it takes me, really.
So I was on stage a couple of years ago with Linda Plant from The Apprentice,
Oh, yeah.
and we were doing different keynotes. I was following her actually. But one of the things she said in her talk was, if I was to give you one lesson in life, it would just be say yes to everything.
Yeah.
Because if you say yes, then you can say no. But if you
Yeah.
say no, then you can't say yes.
Yeah.
And I thought that was one of the most valuable lessons. And I am sure, Holly, you and I are going to be doing stuff through Work Ready Collective without a doubt.
Yeah.
But one of the things you've talked about the different barriers, you've talked about the Scouse Scientist and being that persona. And it's interesting because one of my other podcasts, just for my listeners, if you go back to Prithi Neer, In fact, she set up a whole persona to get her books read. And actually her persona, because it was a secret and nobody knew about Prue, went on to win an award, and she couldn't go on stage to collect it because
Um,
everyone would have known that it wasn't, because Prue was like this blue-eyed blonde woman that she'd
yeah,
made up. Prithi is an Indian, dark, beautiful, dark woman with dark brown eyes. And she was like, oh my God, who's going to be Prue and go on
yeah,
stage? At least you are the same person.
yeah.
We obviously know that the stereotypes still exist in medicine, and you've obviously encountered them still personally. Do you think there's other Scouse scientists out there, or do you think you're still one of the only Scouse scientists out there, really?
So this is the thing. There are so many Scouse scientists out there. There are loads in the workplace. When I see scientists, there are people that look like me, there is diversity. But the problem, I think, is that it's never ever shown. It's never portrayed as that. Even during COVID, that was a time where we got used to seeing scientists on TV quite often. It was never ever someone that looked like me. And I'm sure there were people who looked or sounded like me who could have gone on and delivered those same messages, but they weren't chosen. And that's the problem. So every time, even down to silly things like kids' TV shows or, films or even just like newspapers, anything to do with science, they jump back to the old stereotype. And I just think it's so unhelpful because actually there are a diversity of scientists out there, but they're just never ever showcased. And I think that's where the problem is. So I've said it before on social media, I guess, message to anyone in the media is if you're getting a scientist on, a lot of the time we see scientists on morning television and news and stuff like that.
Yeah, they need to get you on.
Yeah, get me on or someone different. Yeah, don't just go for the same old type of scientist because it's not doing anything to help the stereotype.
Right. Well, I tell you what, I know a lot of people in the industry. I'm going to be banging that drum, Holly, big time for
You know?
you. In fact, we're going to clip this, aren't we, Ben? We're going to clip this. We need Holly on TV. We need to show the world that there are female scientists out there. You've mentioned your beautiful daughter, who I've had the pleasure of seeing setting up this podcast. Look, it's hard, right? I've been a working mum. In fact, my last podcast, ironically, was about breaking down the myths of being a working mother, and it actually got 1,500 views the other night when Mylene Class very kindly
Amazing.
shared it on her Instagram. So, Mylene, you need to share Holly. But seriously, how do you? I mean, you've got a really big, responsible job, right? You're a mum of two. I know that you are in what some people might feel at the moment is a nuclear family. Your husband works, so you're both juggling your 2-year-old. But what does that really feel like for you? Because I'm sure it's not easy, right?
No, it's really hard actually. The juggle, I always say it's so hard, and I'm not naive in the fact that I can only do it because I've got such a good support network around me. And if it was just me and my husband, there's no way I'd be able to do all of this other stuff. And it is so hard. And especially for women, I've heard this terminology thrown around, but it's actually so true. Women are often the default parents. Anything that goes wrong, anytime the kids are sick or can't go to nursery, it's more often than not the woman who has to, compromise and stay off work or do all of the juggling, and all of that is really hard. So I guess for me, the way we balance it, obviously we've got nursery. I dropped a day, so I do 4 days now in the NHS. My husband's also, well, he sort of does longer days, so he has 1 day off with her as well. And I think that's actually really great that, I could have gone to 3 days and had 2 days at home with her, but actually we thought, no, we'll have 1 day each. And she's got me 1 day a week and my husband 1 day a week. And we're really fortunate to be able to do that. And then we've got so many family and friends who help us a lot with our mums, really help us looking after her. But I guess it's the hardest thing for me is, you go to up so early. She doesn't sleep either. My child has never never slept. No, I haven't cracked out to do that yet. But anyway, so that's a whole other story. She's up so early, then it's the nursery run, then I'm going to work, then I'm coming home, cooking the tea, bath, bedtime, all of that. By the time she goes to bed, it's like 8 o'clock at night. And then that's my time to do me Scouse Scientist stuff then. And a lot of the time it gets to 8 o'clock at night and I think, oh, I'm exhausted. I've got no energy to do it. And that's the bit that I'm finding challenging at the minute. It's just getting the time. But obviously the Scouse Scientist stuff is something I'm really passionate about and I really want to do. That's why I'm still doing it. But yeah, it's just tiring, I guess.
And I think I mean, you've been very honest. And, I remember, in fact, we had a bit of a funny joke about it on holiday this year, was when I said, God, we're not going to lie around all day, are we, every day on this holiday? My husband said, but we've always done that. And we sat down and discussed it. And we said, well, we did that because we went to work, both of us, we brought
Yeah.
up kids and we had blended families. So somebody was coming and going or God knows
Yeah.
what every weekend. And then when the holiday came, the thought of getting up and running around or doing something on an all-inclusive was
Yeah.
horrendous. But now they're not here, I'm sort of like, I want to get out. I want to
Yeah.
explore. And actually, I can really relate to that moment of like a whole hour.
Yeah.
Yeah, a whole hour of me. So I think it is really hard. And I think, like you say, whether you're in the lab or whether you're public speaking, being a mum at the zoo, or as I saw on your Instagram last night, popping out for your first Santa Claus
Yeah.
experience. That's so magical now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And actually being able to show up for all that,
Mm.
that's really, really important. So I think it's a really nice message. I think what I'd love to take from that for our listeners is the fact that your husband's prepared to do a different kind of working hours, and actually
Mm.
he's getting the benefit of a whole day with his daughter.
Yeah.
And actually there's a program on Sky Atlantic, if anybody hasn't seen it, called It's All Her Fault. Anyway, you can imagine the child goes missing and you see lots of different stories in this. I won't spoil it for anyone, but in every story, it's about the woman being blamed
Mm.
for whatever's happened to this child being lost.
Yeah.
And you sort of think, really? Like, where's the dad?
Yeah.
And so even to today, I think you're absolutely right. I think it is this sort of default moment.
Mm.
Listen, I've got a 26-year-old and I know who the first phone call is whenever there's a crisis.
Yeah.
And our father. Okay, so what does the future hold for you, Holly, do you think? What ambitions do you have, apart from obviously raising the game, which I'm going to champion, as well as I'm sure Claire Preston and other people will that were there that day at the TEDx. And by the way, I'm going to put a link to Holly's TEDx, because whilst the podcast is doing a lot of justice to her work, I really urge you to watch her TEDx, which I know will be in the link below of this podcast. But what's your ambition? A couple of years from now, up to 5 years, what would you like to be doing, seeing, feeling?
Really, if I'm being honest, and I never used to say this because I felt embarrassed in a way to say it because it felt so impossible. But actually, I'd rather just speak what my dreams are, and if they don't happen, they don't happen. But years ago, I really wanted to be a TV presenter. That was always my dream when I was like 15, 16, 17. That's always what I wanted to be. But I wanted to be it. Not just a general TV presenter, a presenter with a specialist, a specialist knowledge or something. And now I feel like I've got my science specialist knowledge and I'm confident and know what I'm doing with that, and I don't want to ever lose that, and I love my role that I'm doing, and the work I'm doing for patients, so passionate about that. But actually for me personally, I would love to somehow get into the media and have, how good would it be to have a science show with me as the presenter? I mean, I've said how good would it be, and I've said that myself. That sounds a bit arrogant, but I mean for
No, manifest it, Holly. Holly, we're going to manifest it together.
for young people, I just think for me, for my daughter growing up, if she had a science show with a scientist that she could relate to, and they could watch science, young girls out there can watch a science show, be educated about something, make it interesting, not make it boring, and just to encourage them to take that further and be watching something that is delivered by someone who's not the stereotypical scientist. That is the, if I'm being honest, that is the ultimate.
Well, I'll tell you what, this is Voices on the Edge Change, right? This is what the podcast is about. And I think we need an extra runner to Dr. Brian Cox. So here we go.
Yeah,
All right. Holly Ellis, heard it here first. We're going to get her out there. And joking aside, I actually have a couple of contacts outside of this podcast. I'm going to make a couple of introductions. So let's see if we can make this
brilliant.
dream.
Thank you.
No point being in the media for 25 years if I can't try and introduce you to a couple of
Yeah,
people. We'll take that offline for now. So I suppose just as we get towards the end of the podcast, a couple of questions I'd like to dig into is if you could say something to your younger self, because you've talked a lot about legacy and building up the next role models. And, you know, somebody is listening who's got a daughter, because I suspect that's how this will start with this podcast, that somebody's
mm,
either seen a clip or they've got a daughter who's saying similar things to what you said. And, or they might even not even be the scientist, it might be in a different area, but what advice would you give to that younger self now about what you wanted to be?
yeah. So I'd say firstly would be just go for it. You know, whatever it is that you're passionate about, don't be put off because you don't fit into the stereotypical mold of what people in that field look or sound like. And then the other thing is, don't put yourself into a box. You know, I think a lot of the time, you know, kids are put into these boxes.
Mm.
You're a kid that's good at the art. You're a kid that likes science. You're a kid, and it's like they're completely separate things, but actually you can love multiple things. Like you can love makeup and fashion and clothes, but you can still love science, or and you can still love animals, and you can still be a mum, and you can still be, you know, you don't need to just be, because that's what I felt like when I was younger. Right, well, if I'm going to be a scientist, that means I have to look like this, I have to be a big geeky nerd, I have to be obsessed with, you know, Lord of the Rings, read these like comic books, and you know, all these stereotypes that come with being like a science nerd. But actually, I've learned now that you can just be you. That is your one thing. That's, you know, there's no one else that is like you in the world, and you don't need to put yourself into a box. Just do whatever it is that you enjoy.
Okay. And one fun or weird statistic or scientific fact that you think we should share with our listeners today, Holly?
I guess one fact that's interesting about DNA is that we share half of our DNA with a banana, and people don't realize that. So, you know, when you say us and a banana are so completely different, but actually the DNA and what, you know, what's inside us and what's inside a banana actually is about 50% the same. So we're not that different after all.
But just so that I can clip this, Holly,
Yeah.
for a teaser. So, Ben, when you're listening to this, we want this to be a teaser. So, say that again. Our DNA is about 50% the same as a banana.
Yeah, exactly. So our DNA and a banana's DNA are about 50% the same. So we're not that different after all, basically, to a banana.
And what's the 50% that's the same?
Well, you've got to think about it. It's all the things that, you know, make up proteins, make up, there might be DNA code to make cells, to make cell membranes, all of that sort of thing. You know, people would think actually the DNA between a human and a banana must be completely different, but actually the things that make up the basic cellular structures are actually fairly similar.
Well, that is one fact. I think if we'd ever, I'm putting that in the next quiz. What's the percentage of DNA that we're the same in a banana? I
Yeah,
can't imagine anyone's going to get that right unless we've
yeah.
got a scientist in the audience. Wow, that is probably the most weirdest fact I think I've ever heard in my
But
life. And look, the question that everybody would want to be asking you, aside from being a presenter, if you weren't a scientist, what do you think you might have been if you hadn't have had the? So let's get a bit serious here. If you hadn't
yeah,
had the encouraging family, if you hadn't had all the aunties and grandmas and whatever, you know, and clearly very bright individual, but at the end of the day, if you felt that you were just in that wrong place, you dealt the wrong card. I've just slept out for the homeless, by the way, and there was a gentleman there, a really young guy who, it was horrendous. But the bottom line is he's going on to now skate for the UK in the Olympics. And he would never have been able to skate for the Olympics if he hadn't have been picked up by a charity, because he was dealt the wrong card, right? He just was given the wrong card in life. So
Mm,
I suppose I'm just saying to you, what if you hadn't have got the right cards? What if
mm.
you had all of this knowledge and you weren't a scientist? What do you think you might be doing instead?
It's difficult to say really. I guess I loved the art, so something to do with, performing, like dance. I loved dancing when I was younger. I took ballet fairly seriously. So I would have probably tried to pursue that, a career in dance. But looking back, um I don't think I'd have been I don't think I'd have got that far. I don't, I was a good dancer back in the day, but I wasn't, sort of any near professional level or anything like that. So yeah, but that's maybe the route I would have probably took.
Okay, and two more questions. What word do you think describes your journey so far?
I guess ambitious, I would say, because that's what I've always been, and not necessarily at the start. It wasn't me that was ambitious, but it was my teachers and my family that were, I guess, ambitious for me. And only now, I guess, I've decided to be ambitious for myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does, and that's great. But like you say, it was helpful to have. I think there's two schools, isn't it? You either have the family that gives you that big step and encouragement and you go with it, or you don't get it, but you have so much of it inside you that you think,
Mm.
bugger you all.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this. But
Yeah.
it's lovely. And I just think how forward thinking of your mum, particularly, to really be your biggest champion. I think the role models your daughter's got now are just incredible. And how lucky is she?
Yeah.
So we started with the fact that you had that we met purely because I sponsored a TEDx Champions and tickets for people that couldn't afford to come. And then I met you, and then I chose you to be our winner for the podcast, which I'm just more than delighted about. And I feel very blessed to have met you, Holly.
And thank you for choosing me as well. I should say now, I really appreciate it. It was such a surprise when you came up on the day, and yeah, I was over the moon. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, not at all. I've just loved getting to know you in the process of putting the podcast together. Of course, people think we just rock up and do this, but of course, a lot of pre-planning goes on behind the scenes. But what was your sort of best and worst moment of doing a TEDx? Because I think most people think, oh my God, standing on that red dot. What was it like for
Yeah.
you?
The best moment actually was at the end. That sounds weird, but you sort of it's the way well, I should say the worst bit was watching other people do their TED Talks, because it's so nerve-wracking, and I'm quite a confident speaker, but the TEDx, that the pressure was totally different. It was so intense and nerve-wracking, and it was really, felt that I really did feel the nerves, and especially, those first few sentences that you say, I could feel my heart like pounding out of my chest. I felt like I was going to cry. But then at the end, I just felt so relieved, and so everyone was standing on the feet and clapping, and I was just so glad that I did well. And when I came off the stage, my husband was with me, and he's not emotional like I'm quite an emotional person. I came off and he was crying his eyes out, and I was like, oh my God. And that just yeah, that was a nice moment, because he was just like so proud of me. And like I say, he's not really the type to cry over nothing like I am. So that was quite nice.
Well, I think you were quite a pocket rocket. I think there was Honestly, I think we all sort of took a big gasp when you went, I'm the Scouse Scientist, and then you
Yeah.
put up that picture, which I would keep talking about in this podcast of the mad scientist.
Yeah.
I just thought, oh my God, this is going to be brilliant. I just sat there, I just said, this is going to be fantastic. I loved you reminded me of sorry to say this, but you reminded me of that Jodie Cromer moment at the Oscars when she won. Was it the
Yeah.
BAFTA or the Oscar?
Yeah.
She sort of opens her mouth and thanks Stephen Graham.
Yeah.
And you think, yes, get in. This is
Yeah.
incredible. So brilliant. Maybe you should go and look up Stephen Graham actually and see what
Yeah.
he can do for you. You need to appear in one of his next programs, I think,
Mm.
really. But listen, Holly, wow. there's so much in this podcast. I'm going to have to really think about the reflections. But for me, really, you were an absolute winner for me. You are a voice on the edge of change. You are showing women all over the world that actually you can break stereotypes, whether that's in science or anywhere else. And I think what you're doing, along with your teams and all the other people that work with you, because we mustn't forget them, but what you are doing in your time in genetics and forward thinking for proactive healthcare, really, for me, well, for many, but I'm sitting here as your host, I feel is so valuable. And I don't think we truly understand, and I hope they will after this podcast, but I think most people wouldn't truly understand the proactiveness and the effort that's needed to put into medicine and be proactive with genetic testings. Hats off for choosing it. Hats off for being the most determined woman I've met, particularly in this industry. And I hope to keep championing you and role modeling and seeing you fly, because you're certainly one to watch out for. Holly Ellis, thank you for being my first podcast in 2026. This is the most exciting way to kick them off. Thank you
Thank
so much.
you. Thanks so much, Lou. Thanks for having me. I've loved it.
Well, wasn't she just wonderful? What a phenomenal woman she is, and such a powerful reminder that talent is actually everywhere, but perhaps opportunity and representation just isn't. And Holly's story is one of that for sure. And her story, I think, challenges just so many assumptions that we hold. That we still hold about who belongs in science, who should be a scientist, or even what they should sound like. And who would ever think that she could have got to imagine herself at spaces like Oxford or the NHS or even on our TV screens? But I really hope that she ends up on every single one of them. She's certainly done two out of the three. So let's see if we can get her onto our television screens very soon. I think that what stands out the most is not just her academic brilliance, but her refusal to shrink or assimilate or edit herself to fit into somebody else's successes, to break down the stereotypes from growing up in Liverpool, surrounded by three strong women facing imposter syndrome head on. She's really shown us how confidence is built even after one leap of faith, even if not before her experience at Oxford that terrified her. Possibly even just staying for 1 week, she discovered that she could belong. And I think that was such a wonderful story, and something that so many people like yourself listening, I'm sure, could recognize, whether you've been to university or not. Having never been to university and wishing I had, but now, maybe not at the time, but I think that, having an opportunity in life that's given them that is just so fabulous. And I know that my daughter went to university when I least thought she would go to university. So we've really got to break down stereotypes in this world now. And we've got to be open to anybody doing anything. I think what's equally striking is the impact of her work on genetics. Again, it's really abstract science. It's not something we would imagined her to do, and it's deeply human. The other thing I loved about it is that it is really about prevention rather than cure. It's about giving you answers and options and hope. And I think, again, being in control of our health and our health care is actually an amazing thing to do. So, again, I would love to see where that takes us in the future. And she's really, really on the edge of change with that. And it's about protecting our healthcare. It's about being personalized with our healthcare. And it's about offering a fairer system, not just about where we live. It's about really challenging our knowledge on our own health and our systems. And then that brings me to her title, I suppose, the Scouse Scientist. I love the fact that you might have thought it was probably a gimmick, but it's not, is it? It's a brand. And it's a real rebellion of a brand against stereotypes. She isn't just thinking about her career right now. She's truly thinking about her legacy, even at such a young age. She's creating her legacy right now. And she is showing young people, especially girls, and especially girls from working class backgrounds, that you don't have to choose who you want to become. You can achieve absolutely anything. So, I don't know what you're thinking, but I thought that she was probably one of the biggest voices I've had in a long time on Voices on the Edge of Change. And that whatever you take away from this, I hope proactive healthcare, a good and positive message about genetics and how that we look at DNA and genetics wisely. But more importantly, I think that you don't need to fit any model in life to succeed. And actually, sometimes breaking the model is the whole point. So, Holly just isn't, for me, just a voice on the edge of change. She's actually proof that when you stay true to yourself and you say yes to opportunities and you give space then for others to follow. So, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. And if you'd like to know more about any of the Voices on the Edge of Change, do reach out to me or drop me an email at lou@louroby.com. But please, I know I say it on every podcast, but please subscribe. It will really help if you could subscribe to my podcast. And I look forward to my next episode. So until then, Happy New Year and thank you for tuning in.